Good morning. Welcome to Community Congregational Church. On behalf of the Longs, my name is Reverend Jess Shine. I have the privilege of serving as the minister of this congregation. A few notes about our community, and then we will continue. We're on a certified wildlife habitat. In fact, I just saw a coyote run through the cul-de-sac. Some of you who have different, capacities with time probably saw that too, about the size of a medium dog. So we're in their home, so we ask that you honor this space with us by refraining from smoking. If you need to use the restroom, there's two through this door and then an all-gender restroom back there. And if you would, please take out your cell phones and turn them to silent. Or vibrate, or off, whatever you like. So today, through story and song, you will experience Carolyn Long as we remember and celebrate her life and her impact among us. On behalf of this community, we welcome you and give thanks for your presence among us. Would you join me now in a prayer? Cosmic Christ, you are the light of the world. Fill our minds with your peace and our hearts with your love. In these moments together, in the days, weeks, months, and years to come, may what we share here buoy our faith. May these moments of reflection and singing today be a thin place, where the border that separates us from each other and you becomes porous and permeable. Within our darkest night, would you kindle the fire that never dies away? As we today, with David, Vicky, and Cara, honor our beloved Carolyn, may we feel and connect with the true body, born not of flesh and blood only, but alive in our breath and spirit and the beyond. And when we cannot sense you or make sense of this new season of life, may we find ourselves again held in charity and love. For where charity and love are, holy God, you are there. So we invoke these gifts as we have come to know you by many names. Amen. When Death Comes by Mary Oliver. When death comes like a hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility, and I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does toward silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world.
you all. Standing, thank you all. That's a very large voice. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for honoring David and Carolyn. All of us who are standing here at the direction worked with David and worked with a very special leader of ours, Boyd Jarrell, who died much too early. And in putting together this group, many people mentioned how standing here, we are also honoring him, something David and I discussed, and he very much agrees with. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Vicki, Carolyn and Dave's daughter. And I want to tell you a love story. It begins with a little girl named Carolyn, my mother, who was born in the suburbs of Chicago in December of 1941 to first-generation Swedish-American parents, Ruby and Ray England. She was the middle child between older brother Dave and younger sister Jean, who's here with us today. My mom's first love was music. She picked up the flute in 5th grade and never really put it down. She played in the marching band in the Chicago Youth Orchestra and later carried that devotion to the conservatory at Oberlin and throughout every chapter of her life that followed. My mom's greatest love was my dad. Whether you believe it was fate or divine intervention, 2 Midwestern college kids separately uprooted their lives and found their way to Hawaii just as it was becoming the 50th state. During her freshman year at Oberlin, my mother broke her wrist, which led to an unplanned pause from the flute. That summer, she traveled with her family to Oahu to visit her older brother, and on a whim, she decided to stay. My parents met walking home from class at the University of Hawaii. They were neighbors first, and then friends, and then one night at a party, something shifted. A late-night drive around the island followed, and then a first official date, which was dinner and dancing at Waikiki Beach, which my mom said was the last time they ever had that date. A year later, a spontaneous curbside proposal followed, and then led to a devoted 62-year marriage, an enduring partnership that became both an inspiration and a standard for all of us who witnessed it. Their relationship was symbiotic, grounded in mutual respect, love, and cooperation. And one of my favorite memories from my visits to them is of my mother playing the flute while my father cooked dinner, each delighting in each other's gifts day after day. Mom was a devoted mother to Cara and me. She paused her career to stay at home with us when we were young, approaching motherhood with the same intrepid and yet patient care that she brought to everything else. One of my most vivid memories is of my mom insisting, while my dad was away on business, that we must cut down our Christmas tree rather than buy one that was pre-cut. The decision led to the 3 of us, Mom, Cara, and me, and our very rambunctious dog, and Cara and I were just 8 and 5 at the time, to a rural Virginia tree farm in the cold, pouring rain. She chopped down the tree by herself and then dragged it back to the car with minimal help from 2 small girls and an enthusiastic dog. But she was determined to keep the family tradition alive. That same adventurous spirit infused her approach to grandparenting. As one dear friend of mine recently wrote, just last week, "I have clear memories of all the fun plans you would have with your parents' visits. Things my own mother would never have imagined doing with my kids." Alongside my dad, Mom hiked the Grand Canyon with our kids, traveled with the 2 of the very young children by train and then ferry to a remote island off the coast of New Hampshire. She baked endless tasty treats, explored museums all around the country with patient curiosity, and orchestrated creative family Christmas carol concerts with our children who were singing, playing the piano, recorder, and violin while she played her flute. My mother was small in stature, like a little sprite. She was gentle in manner and soft-spoken by nature, but beneath that quiet exterior lived a fighter. Mom possessed steady determination, deep stoicism, and unwavering perseverance. She didn't seek attention or praise. She just did what she believed was right. My mom earned a master's degree in social work and committed her life to serving others, first working with children, later earning a 2nd degree in gerontology, and eventually caring for patients with terminal cancer, first at the National Institutes of Health and then at UCSF. Over more than 40 years, she witnessed not only her patients' illnesses, but the crushing financial burden placed on families at their most vulnerable. From that experience grew one of her deepest convictions, that healthcare should be a right and not a privilege. For her, that belief demanded personal action, not just words. She volunteered tirelessly for Democratic candidates and causes, canvassing door to door from the 1960s through the last decade of her life. Even with advanced cancer, She continued advocating for universal health care, and in the final months of her life, she was still writing and mailing out get out the vote letters. She understood that progress does not happen on its own. It happens because ordinary people decide to show up again and again. My mother was deeply connected to her Swedish heritage. She researched her family history, traveled to Öland in southern Sweden, where her family was from, and carried those traditions wherever she lived. Christmas Eve was a smorgasbord, rolling meatballs with her grandchildren, baking cookies, the kitchen filled with the aromas of red cabbage and rice pudding. And her faith anchored her life. Wherever my parents lived, their church became their found family, from Chicago to Washington, D.C., and for the last 40 years here at CCC. Mom loved seeing the world with my dad. Together they traveled to 6 continents. They were birders and food lovers, curious, engaged, adventurous. In their 70s, they hiked more than 400 miles on the Camino de Santiago in Spain with packs on their backs. They walked Hadrian's Wall. They wandered Tuscany. Their curiosity and wonder never dimmed. My mother truly loved life. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in August of 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Over the next 5.5 years, she endured surgery, unending rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, infections, sepsis, clinical trials, and countless hospital visits without complaint. She was told her disease was terminal, and still she held on to hope. She believed a cure might be found in her lifetime. Her mantra was simple and powerful: I have so much to live for. And she did. This was my mother's love story: a love of music, a love of justice, a love of faith, love of her husband, her family, and her community, and above all, a love of life itself.
I'm Cara, Carolyn's daughter. My mom was one of the most caring and consistently present people in my life. She was the kind of mom who showed up every day in 1,000 quiet and not so quiet ways. One of my earliest memories is of my mom carrying me on the front of her bicycle as she rode me to preschool. The image is like a perfect symbol of who she was, always moving, always taking care of someone, and always making sure we were safe and loved. As I grew up, that care showed up everywhere. She timed in swim meets, organized carpools, took me to piano and flute lessons, and welcomed neighborhood kids into our home with warm smiles and yummy meals. At one point, a high school student in our neighborhood even lived with us for a year so she could finish up her senior year. That was just my mom. If someone needed help, she made room. No matter how busy she was, she always asked how my day was and always reminded me that she loved me. She was deeply devoted to being a mom. She was also a very devoted dog owner. Our dog Alex barked a lot, but we loved him, and our mom loved him most of all. She walked him, bathed him, and took care of him no matter what. He wasn't just a pet, he was family, and she treated him that way. One summer, we helped move our grandparents from Ohio to California. Our mom drove across the country in August in an unair-conditioned car with our dog. Vicki and I were lucky enough to take turns riding in an air-conditioned truck. That story kind of makes me laugh, but it also says everything about her. She did the hard things without complaint, especially when it made taking care of others. She always put Vicki and I first and supported us in whatever made us happy. She encouraged my swimming and later my love for travel and studying abroad. Because of her, I was able to meet my Swedish relatives on a trip to Sweden as a teenager. She was so proud of her Swedish heritage and stayed connected with relatives in Sweden throughout her life. She also taught me to drive a stick shift on the hills of Mill Valley. I nearly caused her to have a heart attack a couple times. It wasn't easy for either of us, but somehow we survived it together. Being a mom was often a thankless job, and I know as a child and a teenager, I wasn't always as appreciative as I should have been. Looking back now, and as a mother myself, I understand all that moms do, and I realize just how fortunate I was. And being a mom didn't stop when I left for college. She was still always there when I needed her. She sent little surprises every Valentine's Day and Easter. She always remembered Social Work Appreciation Month and sent me and even my coworkers small gifts every March. That was just who she was, thoughtful, attentive, and always thinking of others. She was also a dedicated grandmother. When I became mom for the first time, she shared what she knew about motherhood with generosity and love. Even though we were far apart, she visited regularly and stayed deeply interested in her grandchildren's lives, always curious about what they were doing and thinking. She looked forward to our weekly Zoom calls, which we've had since 2020, and treasured that time together. I also have to credit my mom for introducing me to social work. She never pushed me in that direction. She would have supported me no matter what I chose. In fact, I once told her I never wanted to be a social worker because she worked so hard and I didn't want to work that hard. And yet, her desire to help others was instilled in me. I eventually followed her in her footsteps and became a social worker myself. Now that I'm retired, I'm still trying to carry forward the values she lived every day. I want to thank my mom for everything she gave me, for her love, her strength, her example, and the values she passed on through the ways she lived her life. I love you very much, Mom. You are deeply and profoundly missed.
First, I want you to know how much we appreciate your expressions of love and concern and care during Carolyn's illness. Carolyn was committed to life in the communities of relatives, of friends, of CCC, and more recently, Aldersley. And we both felt held during the treatment and final days. My saga with Carolyn begins in Hawaii. We both left the Midwest and Midwestern universities for the University of Hawaii. As daughter Vicki mentioned, the relationship began as friends, walking home from classes at the end of the day. It wasn't until a year later that we began dating and fell in love. That friendship persisted. She was my best friend for over 62 years. We like to say that our relationship was codependent, a good kind of codependency, rather than the bad, clingy kind. It recognized that we had complementary strengths we could rely on to make life better together than separately, and that we would be there to compensate for our weaknesses, and that we'd support each other in our separate careers and interests, for example, social work and single-payer health care in Carolyn's case. Our relationship we could take anywhere in the world and know that each of us would have the other's back. She was tough and resilient in her quiet and gentle way. She seldom complained. You've heard that theme from both Vicki and Cara. Early in our marriage, we spent 5 days in a leaking tent at Hadrian's villa outside Rome during the flood of the century. In Chicago, she was a pioneer of the natural birth movement, something that very few people know. Because before our first child, Vicki, was born, she read Elizabeth Bing's Practical Lessons for Easier Childbirth, and trained like an athlete to give birth without anesthesia. At the time, fathers were denied access to delivery rooms, so she had to go in alone. When the anesthesiologist started putting the mask over her nose, she pushed it away. The doctor was a skeptic about natural childbirth. But when she saw Carolyn's resolve, she became her coach. And Carolyn gave birth naturally without sedation. 3 years later, when Cara was born, the same hospital had created a procedure for expectant mothers who wished to give birth naturally, and I was permitted in the delivery room. At 73, she shouldered a pack and walked over 400 miles on the Camino. And at 75, she slogged through ankle-deep mud on the trails of Tuscany. She was able to argue for what she thought was right without being disagreeable. I was the lawyer, but she was the better negotiator. In Chicago, as the neighborhood precinct captain of the anti-Mayor Daley Independent Democrats, she went door to door with Vicki strapped to her front. Who would not open the door seeing that? Medical staff she worked with as a social worker considered her something of a miracle worker who could de-escalate overwrought patients and obtain services for them such as housing and transportation. She was determined and positive throughout more than 5 years of cancer treatment and loved to make our medical appointments into outings that included walking for exercise and eating out. Her Swedish heritage was significant to her identity. I became aware of this in Hawaii before we were married when, as an undergrad at the University of Hawaii, she prepared a Swedish Christmas smorgasbord. In 1965, when we were in grad school, she was one of the first in her family to return to Sweden since her grandparents migrated around 1900. I'll never forget the day we arrived unannounced in the small town of Tingsryd in Sweden's glassblowing region. We were lost and sought the assistance of a chimney sweep on a bicycle who spoke English. Carolyn knocked on the door, which was opened by a woman who looked like her. This was the beginning of a 60-year relationship with her Swedish relatives, with numerous visits back and forth, and including some of which are on the Zoom today. To say that Carolyn was empathetic was an understatement. Strangers would come up to her in the grocery store and tell her their life story. There was something about her that people trusted instantly. She understood that we can create a heaven or a hell for ourselves in how we interact with other people. She was as good as any person I've ever known in seeking to create heaven on earth on a daily basis, which she did for me for 62 years. And she passed that on to our 2 wonderful daughters.
I'm Jean, Carolyn's sister. I believe that I probably am that she was, sorry, I believe that I was Carolyn's longest. I have known Carolyn longer than most of you here, if not all of you. She was 2 years old when I was born, so I've known her a very long time. We lived in a 3-bedroom house in Elmwood Park, Illinois. Mom and Dad had a bedroom. Our older brother, Dave, had a bedroom. Carolyn and I shared a bedroom. And she remembered that we would sing songs before we went to sleep at night. We were very close when we grew up. We went to the same elementary school. We went to Sunday school at our church every Sunday. We learned how to swim at the YMCA. And we were part of a Girl Scout troop together. And of course, we were in the band together. Carolyn playing the flute, and I played the clarinet. And also our parents encouraged us to do well in school. And when she was graduating after 12 years in school, she was notified that she was the salutatorian in the class of 250 students. Well, the commencement program was set up so that the valedictorian would give a talk during the ceremony, and it would be, you know, now that you've been going to school for 12 years and learned, now it's your turn to go out and use what you have learned in school. And go out and do your best and really be a good source of good for the world. Well, the valedictorian was too shy to give a speech, and she begged Carolyn to give it to her, and Carolyn gave this speech at the commencement. After the commencement, one of her favorite teachers, who was the teacher of social studies, came up to congratulate her. And he said that she would be a shining star in the future. He said, look up in the sky. There's that bright star is you, and you are going to be a wonderful person for the world. Carolyn believed in God. She would say, God is the ground of my being. Remember that. And I'd like to close now with a verse from Matthew. Let your light shine so that other people can see your good works and praise God. So let's all give God praise for Carolyn.
I've had to adjust mine a little bit because some of the stories are repeating with what I wrote too. So I hope this will go well. My name is Erin England. I am Carolyn's niece. I'm her big brother David's middle child.
I have an older sister, Kirsten, who could not be with us today, and it breaks her heart not to be here, but she's watching the Zoom. And I have a young brother, Matthew. And I'm happy to be able to honor my Aunt Carolyn today with a few memories and insights into her life from the David England clan. Her older brother was a big personality, and so I have to talk a little bit of his stories that will weave in. So Carolyn and her siblings were very proud, as you've heard, of their Swedish ancestry, second-generation born Americans, descendants from Swedish immigrants who settled in Minnesota in the late 1800s. Carolyn's grandmother, Johanna, was only 18 when she made the courageous journey alone across to the ocean to America. I'm thinking some of the genetics have passed on down to Carolyn. She had lost her parents and was in search of a better, more prosperous life. She found her way to other relatives in the Minneapolis area, working as a nanny until she eventually met and married another Swede named Julius, who was a talented carpenter. He built her a beautiful 2-story house with a big garden, and they had 5 daughters. Johanna sewed all their clothes, including their underwear, my grandma Ruby used to say. Carolyn's mother, Ruby, was their second-born daughter. She was petite and determined, like Carolyn, in her accomplishments, a talented seamstress, weaver, and baker. When Ruby was 24, she met and married Ray, a handsome football player with a college degree in electrical engineering. They had 3 children, David, Carolyn, and Jean. I'm sure Ruby and Ray were excited to have the first grandson in the family. Little did they know my father would turn out to be quite a handful. He was a self-proclaimed wild coyote, so it's kind of fitting there was the coyote. I'm sure that was him, because knowing him, he would want to be here. He would not want to be missing this. Who marched to his own drum beat. As a youngster, he rode his tricycle down the basement stairs into a cement wall. Suffice to say, I'm sure Ruby was overjoyed 7 years later when sweet Carolyn came along, followed by Jean 2 years after that. Both girls were very sweet and agreeable to Ruby's parenting goals, unlike big brothers. Despite David's rebellious nature, he loved his younger sisters very much and always came up, according to Jean, always came up with fun games for them to play when he babysat them. There's also a story about him returning home from college with a puppy for his little sisters. The girls loved him as well. He was a big personality in their life, and they were so proud of him when he earned his wings and became a Navy pilot stationed in Hawaii. At some point, Carolyn traveled with her family to visit her brother in Hawaii when she was still at Oberlin. She was so enchanted with the natural beauty of the island, she decided to follow her intuition and transfer from Oberlin College to the University of Hawaii. It was a bold move for a young woman in the late 1950s, and it changed the trajectory of her life. It paved the way for her to become a social worker, and it's also where she met Dave Long, the love of her life. There's a funny family story I have to share about Carolyn's brother, David, unknowingly influencing the course of their relationship. In the early stages of her courtship with Dave, he initially thought Carolyn might be a bit too religious and traditional for him, being a young college student breaking away from his religious roots. And that was until he met her big brother, David, at a party. At some point in the evening, Brother David played a tape for the partygoers that he had created while hunkered down in a blizzard on a naval base in Alaska with several buddies after eating a large amount of beans. The tape was called The Great Crepitation Contest. And it brought so much fun and laughter to the party that it made young Dave Long rethink his initial impression of Carolyn. Maybe she also maybe she must also have the genetics of an outlier if she is related to that guy. They eventually got married and became great partners. You all know this story. They pursued their careers, created a beautiful family, and were able to explore the far corners of the earth together, all while making a positive impact on the people and communities they touched. As many of you know, Carolyn did excel as a shining star in her career as a social worker at UCSF, which led to her life's mission, working to help Californians and Americans get access to universal health care, or Medicare for all. As a registered nurse myself, I'm proud to continue this fight in her honor, especially during the time when many Americans are losing their health insurance. In closing, I just want to share the powerful influence Carolyn had on my life. She was petite but not small. Her power was in her integrity and determination to make the world a better place. Her smile could light up a room, and she always made everyone feel so loved and so important. After my father passed, she really reached out to my brother and I and just made sure we always knew we still had family. And we so appreciate that. We spent several springs hiking in the foothills of Yosemite area, identifying birds and plants and singing songs, and it was just really lovely, really healed our hearts. We love her dearly and we'll miss her very much.
And I just wanted to share one kind of unexpectedly complex, short little song that we used to sing. It was my father's idea.
On the way to visit Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Dave.
Yes, and so it goes like this. I'm going to sing it once, and you're welcome to repeat it if you wish. So it goes, Uncle Carolyn, Auntie Dave.
No, it's
Uncle Carolyn, we love you. Auntie Dave, we love you too.
And we thought that was hilarious. So I think we should all sing that together real quick.
Uncle Carolyn, Aunt, we love you. Auntie Dave, we love you too.
For those that don't know me, I'm Teddy. Carolyn was my grandmother. I'll admit I've never actually called her Carolyn before. To her grandkids, she was Mimi. My memories of Mimi when I was young revolve around music. She was deeply invested in my and my siblings' growth as musicians from an early age, as you heard from my mother. However, my own memory of our Christmas time concerts differs a little bit from my mom's telling, and probably says a lot more about Mimi's enduring patience for our evident lack of musical talent. It really is a testament to her remarkable ability on the flute, especially late into life, that my family has such a rosy memory of those holiday performances. I can't remember another one of my own concerts where, growing up, where the actual sound of the instruments was looked back on fondly. But the clear, pure sound of Mimi's flute rising over the din must have still been beautiful. Our Christmas gift from her and my grandfather was never a surprise. Yet somehow theirs was the gift that I look forward to the most every year. Every year, the grandchildren were allowed to donate to a charity of our choice. She taught us that the joy of giving to others is the greatest joy, and she taught us that every year. However special her visits to us over the holidays were, I always especially looked forward to traveling out to Mill Valley, to my grandparents' home at 333 Lowell Avenue. If there's a platonic ideal of a home, I think that must have been it. There was a harmony between the values that they held and the house that they lived in that you could feel in the garden and in the kitchen, and that was captured by every instrument, the piano, the harp, the flute, that lived in the living room. When they moved out of that house this summer, I took a book with me that they planned to give away. It was a book by Kierkegaard called For Self-Examination that Mimi had read in a philosophy course she took in college. At the time, I guess I thought I could find some key to the way she lived and thought by reading it. I'd taken a class on Kierkegaard at the University of Chicago a couple of years prior. Attending the university and living in the neighborhood of Hyde Park was an experience I shared with my grandparents. My freshman year, I lived in a dorm situated right in between the law school and the School of Social Work. So, maybe a little too close, yeah. I have many special memories from listening to Mimi talk about living in Hyde Park in Chicago in the 60s, with Grandpa never too far away to correct the record on some obscure fact lost to history. While I was at college, I read the classics and learned that virtue is the alignment of good beliefs and good actions. Mimi always seemed to have a remarkable internal consistency between the two. Her career, her advocacy, her dedication to music, they had the same harmony as her home. Mimi was an incredible baker, but I always loved her chocolate sauce the best. It was perfectly balanced, both a little salty and a little sweet. And when you poured it over a scoop of ice cream, it always held this consistency the way that store-bought chocolate syrup does, something that I had previously assumed was only possible with the assistance of exotic additives with numbers in their names, something that Carolyn and Dave never would have used. A few years ago, I asked her for the secret recipe. It is remarkably simple. You melt 1 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips and a half stick of butter in a pan. Once they're melted, you add a 1/4 cup of sugar and a 1/3 cup of water, stirring them slowly to combine. That's the trick. And finally, you take the sauce off the stove, and you add a teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt to finish. I've made that exact recipe dozens of times since then. Every single time it's been delicious, but not once has it achieved her perfect consistency. Mimi had a patience and a depth of caring which is impossible to replicate. In the book I borrowed from her, Kierkegaard argues that while the world is complex, if we look closely at ourselves, we'll discover that there are a few fundamental moral questions to which the answer is obvious. The recipe for a good life is no secret. What's hard is to actually live it. We're gathered here today to celebrate someone who did.
to do a wardrobe change. I appreciate Dave asking me to offer reflections on Carolyn's musical journey. It's a pleasure to do that because Carolyn loved music. She loved playing her flute, and she played her flute like an angel. Carolyn's musical journey, as you've been hearing, started early, playing with the Chicago Youth Symphony, progressing to the Oberlin Conservatory of Music, university chamber groups, and symphony orchestras, even in Hawaii, the Halahum Korean Dance Company. And those are only highlights. Carolyn and I were brought together through our husbands who had worked together at the ACLU in Chicago. From there, the Longs moved to the Washington, D.C. area. And then 7 years later, in 1979, we did too, and that's when Carolyn and I really connected. Our first evening together in their home, it took no time at all for Carolyn to discover our mutual love of music. She got out her flute, I sat down at the piano, and thus began 47 years of a rich and meaningful collaboration. I will always remember the first several times we played together. When a piece ended, it's hard to say this because I'm half crying, we would burst out giggling. I wasn't familiar with flute repertoire, so I was happy for Carolyn to choose pieces for us. I will admit, though, to being taken aback when she started right out with Paul Hindemith's Sonata for Flute and Piano. The choir members get this. Which, as soon as I got home, I discovered was a much more modern and much more difficult piece than I had ever tackled. But that was only the first. Over our time playing together, she brought Bach sonatas, the most famously difficult of all, Poulenc's Sonata for Flute and Piano, and many lovely shorter pieces by Handel, Schubert, Schumann, Fauré, Debussy, and many more. At first, we performed at the informal musicales that my husband David and I hosted in our home every December. Then we performed at our church, which I should mention, we even played the Hindemith Sonata at the Easter Vigil. Then in 1985, only 6 years into our collaboration, the Longs moved here to the Bay Area. Of course, we were disappointed to see them go, and I wondered how we could possibly keep up our collaboration while living across the country from each other. But we did, obviously, and she gets all the credit for that too. In fact, this whole story of her musical journey is really about what her family calls Carolyn's characteristic resolve. That resolve was exactly what she brought to our collaboration. It was through Carolyn's resolve that even living almost 3,000 miles apart, we were always working on something to play the next time we could come together. It was also through her resolve that we performed here at this church, and then performed a recital on her 70th birthday, and then another, amazingly, just a few years ago on her 80th. She held both birthday recitals in the Washington, D.C. church that our families had attended together in the 1980s. Why had she chosen D.C.? Because that made the recitals easier to attend for her East Coast family, as she was eager, again resolved, to share with her grandchildren her lifetime love of music. Carolyn also resolved to institute a regular Taizé service here at CCC, which many of you have faithfully participated here in your beautiful spaces, and even when necessary on Zoom. In August, we played our most beloved Bach sonata for the last time. By that time, she had significant chemo-induced neuropathy in her fingertips, which made playing the flute difficult, but she somehow managed. Nevertheless, it seemed to the rest of us that her playing was as beautiful as ever. Finally, one vibrant thread I can't leave out of this narrative of her musical journey is her beloved life partner, Dave. An active musician and singer himself, Dave encouraged and supported Carolyn's playing in myriad ways. As I experienced it year after year, there was no music more beautiful to Dave than Carolyn's flute playing. Listening to her play moved Dave in a way that only he can know, for her angelic playing was woven into the very fabric of their long and loving marriage. Thank you.
It is an honor to remember Carolyn Long today here with all of you. Carolyn and I began the last phase of our official social work careers around the same time at the UCSF Cancer Center. I was new to San Francisco, having recently moved from Boston. And though we worked at different campuses at UCSF, Carolyn was a support and resource for me from the very first days. Carolyn, no surprise to all of you after all you've heard here, was the sort of social worker who would leave no stone unturned to find patients and families the support and resources they needed. She did this with great compassion and a commitment to the emotional and spiritual well-being of all those she served. As you've been hearing from others, we as social workers in healthcare found some of our most upsetting situations to be patients who had no health insurance but were not eligible for public assistance because they had actually managed to save some money for retirement. This was so infuriating and so difficult that Carolyn really took the lead, I think, for social workers in general around this area to work toward health care for all. And Carolyn's commitment extended to her colleagues. I was lucky enough to receive her knowledge and support throughout our years together at UCSF. We learned from one another in our work with support groups and supported each other emotionally when the work felt overwhelming. Whenever I had a patient situation I was puzzled by, I would ask Carolyn for help, and she always came through. But it didn't stop there. We retired from our social work positions at the same time and made a plan to meet regularly. Our years of monthly coffee dates at Good Earth in Mill Valley were such a gift. We shared our delights and challenges in finding our way through retirement. Carolyn's commitment to making a difference in the world and her love of family were a joy to witness and an inspiration for me as I wandered through this new phase of life. When Carolyn faced her own cancer journey, we talked about the things we had learned and didn't learn in our years accompanying hundreds of cancer patients. Carolyn's spiritual path was also an inspiration, and her connection to this CCC community enough to pique my interest and eventually get me here. She was my doorway to this community. And in experiencing the Taizé songs here today, I realize how grateful I am that she and Dave brought Taizé here. For me, Taizé was the most important spiritual practice that I had known in my previous church life. And in fact, my wife proposed to me during a Taizé song in San Francisco some years ago. So it's been such a joy to have that brought here by Carolyn and Dave. I'm so grateful for the years of friendship and the ways Carolyn and I were able to share our strengths and our vulnerabilities. I miss you, Carolyn, and you will always be with me.
Hello, fans of Carolyn. My name is Gail Lester, and Dave asked me to speak today a little bit about Carolyn's work here at CCC, her beloved faith community. Carolyn shared so many gifts. Her temperament was one of them, attentive, measured, keen, and thoughtful. Any of you here work with Carolyn in church leadership role? Raise your hands. I see some hands. Carolyn brought grace and intelligence to her work. Her research was careful, and Carolyn brought kindness to her focused listening. You've heard about the Taizé chants and experienced them today, and there was something true about Carolyn as she played her flute for those. True as the sound of that flute, a perfect instrument for her. Carolyn also brought her skills for project managing and volunteer support. My experience with Carolyn centered around our Earth Steward Sacred Space team. Some churches call that buildings and grounds, but you find quickly that nobody signs up to do it if you call it that. You can see Carolyn's work a lot of places here, whether you're part of the CCC family or have never been there before. You look outside these walls, coming here, you passed a planted courtyard out there, and if you walk down that breezeway toward the lawn garden, with its astounding views of the Golden Gate Bridge and Mount Tam, you turn left on the path leading down to the CCC labyrinth. There you will see the artistry of the landscape designer and help me, Anna, her name? Leah Good-Harris, thank you. And you will feel its protective and enclosing landscape. Sit and reflect or walk. Bring your burdens into the circle, pausing at its center to renew your spirit. Then walk back to the entry, carrying a new intention for your day. The labyrinth is there in large part to Carolyn's inclusion of many players, to her guidance, her attention to detail, and patient forward movement. Move your feet upslope to the view garden along the crunchy path encircling the lawn with its stone wall. CCC's original landscape held a strong design, but its irrigation and plantings had aged out. Water became scarce. Carolyn led our Earth Stewards team to revision this space for a new era, following always our charge to make changes through an earth-friendly lens. We worked together to reduce the thirsty lawn, offer a pleasant strolling path, and select pollinator plants for our wildlife gardens. Of course, Dave was involved with that. We also discovered that some wildlife were a bit too enthusiastic about our choices, so we had to adjust what we planted. This combined project took several years and stages. Good thing Carolyn had such stamina to lead us, which she later showed in walking the Camino and so valiantly in her journey through cancer. Thank you for your example, Carolyn. In 2010 and 11, beloved CCC members Bernice and Emil St. Augustine passed, leaving the church a gift. That's when Carolyn and I became shopping buddies. We were tasked to refurnish and upgrade the fireside room, which is, of course, the room with the fireplace in it. We shopped for sturdy couches made in the USA. We chose earth-friendly carpet squares to lay on the floor. We needed to upgrade our shabby conference table and chairs, but replace? Nope. We decided they still had good life in them, so we reupholstered and refurnished them. Besides, that table has a whole history of hospitality in it, which brings me to yet another gift of Carolyn's. Raise your hand if you've ever been involved in a work day at CCC. There are a lot of hands there. I don't know how many dozen we held, but you, oh faithful volunteers, showed up. Whether it was to paint, scrape, weed, add flowers to baskets, run the broom mobile down the ravine to tackle great stands of broom, or label and reorganize kitchen cupboards. And did you bring food for the potluck afterwards? Did you warm it in the blue stove Carolyn researched for us? Did you place your warm dish on that refinished table? And did Carolyn bake her persimmon pudding with Trader Joe's French vanilla ice cream? Did you get to eat some? Best recipe ever. Spoken by a persimmon pudding aficionado from childhood, just saying. Thank you, Carolyn, for your faithful legacy. We miss you, yet you are everywhere.
Before I offer the closing prayer, I feel as though I should ask if anyone's been engaged since that song. No proposals? Just want to be sure. The most recent piece of earth tending that I'm aware of, Gail, I don't think you mentioned this, is the pollinator garden just outside the door here. I hope that you get a chance to walk the grounds. Often on Sunday evenings, we would gather in a circle around the candle lit in the center of the seminar room and sing those words we just sang together. David, I looked up October 22, 2023, my very first Taizé here at CCC. That was the closing song that we sang. I would come a few minutes early to the seminar room, and David and Carolyn had already prepared the order of service, and we'd meet, and I'd usually get a history lesson on CCC, or a story about their life or love or some plans for treatment. And David, I can still see the softness and tenderness you had on my last visit with you and Carolyn. I remember you leaning over to her and rubbing her back as she was sucking the juice out of the pineapple slices she'd been enjoying for breakfast. And I think of that image because I imagine over the 6 decades you were together, you two drawing out all the sweetness you could from your travels, from gatherings that you hosted, and from your shared life. Even now, when there is pain, you have found a way to draw out sweetness. So I want to close with a prayer that was written by Brother Matthew of the Taizé community in France this week, and it seemed fitting for Carolyn. Following the postlude, refreshments will be served, and we invite you to continue sharing your stories and enjoy the campus and make yourself at home. But let me offer these words of blessing. Christ, your life shows us that God is love. May this love always renew our trust in you and root us in the hope of the day when you will be all in all. So today we commit Carolyn and her life to the holy, found in service and song, grit and grace, hospitality and generosity. We commit Carolyn to the love that is all, that beckons us to integrity of the true body, beyond borders, ethnicities, occupations, genders, finance, and theology. Love, gather us into oneness. Let us rejoice and be glad. Love, gather us with the saints also, that we might see your face in one another. The joy that is immense and good as it permeates the world without end. May it be so. Amen.